In 2010, construction workers were digging on a street in London when they were surprised to discover a strange object. It looked like a peculiar round stone, but when they examined it closely, they realized it wasn't a stone. It was a human skull. The workers were terrified. How did a skull end up there? They thought they might have found evidence of a murder, so they immediately reported it to the police. The police examined the skull and concluded it was indeed evidence of a murder. However, this wasn't a recent crime. It was an old case, more than 100 years old. The skull they found was the missing piece of a gruesome story that terrified London and became a topic of discussion over 140 years ago. This story began in 1879 in London. A woman named Julia Thomas, in her 50s, was a widow without children. She was known for her strict and sometimes overbearing personality. Julia was particular about how she lived, always dressing in elegant clothes and jewelry, despite being from a middle-class background. She believed that presenting herself well earned her respect from others. Julia was looking for a maid to help with her household chores. However, she wasn't willing to hire just anyone. She wanted someone hardworking and diligent. One of Julia's acquaintances recommended an Irish woman named Kate Webster. Kate was a strong-built woman who worked as a domestic servant. Hearing about her energy and physical strength, Julia decided to hire Kate without hesitation. Initially, the relationship between the two women wasn't bad. But over time, Julia's strictness started to wear on Kate. Julia would inspect Kate's work closely, pointing out any spots she missed or dust she hadn't cleaned. Julia's constant scrutiny irritated Kate, who also had a strong personality and wouldn't tolerate being scolded. The tension between them grew. One of the main points of conflict was Kate's frequent absences from the house. Julia gave her breaks and allowed her to leave on Sundays for half the day, but Kate would often return late. She had a son who stayed with a friend, and Kate would visit him. However, when she returned, Julia noticed the smell of alcohol on her. Julia, being religious and strict, found this behavior unacceptable. One Sunday, Julia threatened to fire Kate, but gave her a 3-day ultimatum to improve her work ethic. On the day of the incident, Julia was preparing to go to church and needed Kate's assistance. However, Kate was late, and when she finally returned, she reeked of alcohol. Julia was furious and scolded her harshly. Kate, in return, stood her ground, saying it was her personal time, and she had the right to spend it as she pleased. Their argument escalated, but Julia cut it short as she was running late for church. Julia attended church that day, visibly upset. She apologized to those who noticed her distress, blaming her maid for her lateness. After the service, she returned home early, still angry. Around that time, a carriage driver passing by the river noticed a floating box near the riverbank. Out of curiosity, he opened it, expecting to find stolen goods. Instead, he found dismembered human remains. Horrified, he reported the discovery to the police. The police concluded that the remains were from a small framed person with dark hair, but couldn't identify the body. Meanwhile, a man named John Church visited Julia Thomas's house to purchase furniture. He had recently opened a new shop and was looking for second-hand items. He met a woman at the house who introduced herself as Julia and claimed she inherited the house from her recently deceased aunt. John agreed to buy the furniture, and workers began loading it onto a cart. Neighbors noticed the unusual activity and asked the workers what was happening. The workers pointed to the woman standing outside the house, saying she was Julia. However, the neighbors knew something was off. The woman wasn't Julia. It was Kate Webster. When confronted, Kate nervously said that Julia had gone on a trip and would return soon. Suspicious, John Church searched through the loaded belongings and found clothes and letters addressed to both Julia Thomas and Kate Webster. Realizing something was terribly wrong, he alerted the neighbors and workers, asking them to hold Kate. But by the time they entered the house to capture her, Kate had fled. The police were called, and upon searching the house, they found it in disarray. Furniture was moved, and curtains and carpets were missing. They also discovered bloodstains and human remains in the kitchen stove. They realized that Kate had not only robbed the house, but also killed Julia and burned her remains to cover up the crime. The police found letters addressed to Kate's family in Ireland and traced her to her hometown. They alerted the Irish police, who recognized Kate's name due to her criminal record. Kate had a long history of theft, fraud, and impersonation, dating back to her teenage years. She had been arrested multiple times under different aliases and served several prison sentences. The Irish police eventually found Kate hiding at her uncle's farm. She was arrested and taken back to London, along with her son. Her uncle, unaware of her crimes, was relieved to see her taken away. Kate's trial gained massive public attention due to the horrific nature of the crime. Even Madame Tussauds created a wax figure of Kate before the trial concluded. The case attracted widespread media coverage, and even the Crown Prince of Sweden attended one of the court sessions. During the trial, Kate denied the murder and blamed John Church, but his alibi was strong. Witnesses testified that Kate had been planning the crime. Eventually, Kate was found guilty and sentenced to death by hanging. In a last attempt to avoid execution, Kate claimed she was pregnant. A medical examination disproved her claim, and her sentence stood. Before her execution, Kate finally confessed to the crime, detailing how she killed Julia after an argument, dismembered her body, and tried to cover it up. Kate Webster was executed by hanging in 1879. Her crime remains one of the most gruesome and infamous murders in London's history. In 2010, when the skull was discovered during the street excavation, forensic analysis confirmed that it belonged to Julia Thomas, the final missing piece of a century-old mystery.